Hey guys, thanks for listening to this episode of Reanimated. This is just a message to let you know that this week's intro and outro music is the song Zombie Infection Hardcore Instrumental by Canem Edit 777, and it's shared with a Creative Commons license. And you can listen to it on SoundCloud, so go check it out.
Welcome, zombie fans, to this week's episode of Reanimated. I am H.A. Conrad, here with my co-host, as always, the intrepid Stuart Tiffin. Hello, Stuart.
Good morning. Afternoon.
Afternoon. What have you. This is, as I said, episode 60... Did I say? I don't know. Episode 67, and this episode, as all of our episodes, is brought to you by Squarespace, which is the all-in-one platform that makes it easy to create your own website. We use it here. It's awesome. If you'd like to try out Squarespace, we do have an offer code for all of our listeners. You can use the term zombie, which is not case sensitive, and you'll receive 10% off your first purchase with them. So thank you, Squarespace, as always, for sponsoring Reanimated. So today we've got the usual things in the zombie undead news forums, and we'll be discussing the first sort of installment of the graphic novel iZombie Volume 1. The CW show, which is based upon this graphic novel, is going to be premiering this week on March 17th. So,
whoa.
Yeah, I know, right? So I'm curious to hear what you think about this, Stuart. So I'm ready to get the ball rolling. What do we have in the news today?
In the news, so we got a smattering, a different a collection of stuff. I think the biggest chunk of our news is going to be about the Walking Dead spinoff show, because there were some announcements made this week. But the first thing is not Walking Dead related. It is a fashion story, which we don't typically talk about. But I thought this was actually a pretty interesting little article from Business of Fashion. So it's kind of like a trade magazine in fashion wear.
Oh, come on. You were dying to talk about this. I could tell.
Well, yeah. I wish I had more of these clothes. So the article is about a survivalist upswing in menswear. And basically because the author thinks because the world seems like a more uncertain place and everybody suspects a society-ending apocalypse around every corner. Now, respectable designers are making clothes that are, sort of designed to help one, make it after everything goes to shit.
What I like that they're saying that they're styling men as post-apocalyptic urban warriors. What an amazing term that is.
That's what I think every time I look at a male model, for sure.
I mean, we haven't had something as useful as this since the Utilikilt came out.
Yeah, that's good.
I know. So, yeah, it's... You know what? I have to say, honestly, I do think clothing should be more useful, and I'm all on board having useful clothing and functional clothing as opposed to, sort of just togs to wear, but fashion just generally is not. So the fact that this is, I don't know. The fact that this showing up in Barney's and places like that is a little bit strange, but okay.
Yeah, it's not like this is going to overtake the haute couture type, runway walks, but at least companies are putting effort towards having like extra Leatherman pockets in jackets and heat-sealed seams and triple-stitched other seams and blah, blah, blah. So, and like a company that makes axes is also now making clothing. And yeah, and like you, I believe in function over form in terms of clothing. Usually that function is like super comfort. So.
Yes, agreed. One thing that has been and myself along with quite a few other people have been laughing a lot about is the whole Canada Goose phenomenon that has happened this winter. I don't know
I read about it in this article for the first time. Please tell me more.
Okay, so basically, if you were in New York this winter, and I would imagine other urban areas, I don't know if this made it up to Boston as much, but the subway is packed with people wearing these Canada Goose parkas. And part of the reason why is apparently they kept showing up, specifically they showed up in some fashion shoot. Forgive me, I cannot forget who it was who was wearing it. She wore it in some fashion shoot where she was wearing a bikini under it, so it started making the rounds and getting like a high profile, and it just became one of those things that you see all these people wearing. And so they're made in Canada. They're these parkas that are just filled with goose feathers, and they have like coyote fur for the hood. Very practical to be wearing this in New York, by the way. And, you know, I would say if you're dealing with super, super cold temperatures, or, you know, you live in Canada or Alaska or something like that, maybe this makes sense. But in New York, especially when you get on the subways, those things get hot. So not just, it's not, so you see people wearing them, but you also see people looking like they're about to pass out in them. And it is somewhat humorous, admittedly.
These are serious. These are the kind of things that like researchers wear in the North Pole.
They also take up a lot of space on the subway, so you find yourself being kind of sandwiched in between Canada Goose people on the subway, and it's super bizarre. And so, but they'll be wearing this and also be wearing the most ridiculous shoes like stilettos or something like that in the winter. So, you know, I'm all for functional clothing. It's just very funny how some people sort of interpret these particular trends. Anyway, but, you know, if this is the way it's going, I can't really fault that. I just think it's somewhat funny to see people wearing it in a more urban setting. Yes, I have seen the Leatherman tools and whatever, and compasses, but seriously, when are you actually using these things? This store is located in New York, the people that are talking about all this stuff, so it's like, okay.
Well, you know, it's the cultural center of our nation, as you know.
Clearly. It's also where the most people are going to die if there is actually some sort of a zombie outbreak. So maybe they know what their business better than I.
Well, it's an interesting article that addresses a few different developments in this field. It's so we'll have that link up in the show notes. I guess that's enough to say about survivalist menswear.
Right, and you'll be doing a fashion show of your own later on, right, when you acquire all these pieces?
Of course.
Okay, just want to make sure. Next up is more news about, or non-news, sort of, about the Walking Dead spin-off.
It's definitely real news. The announcement of getting picked up for 2 seasons, the order, that's big news.
No, it is big news, but it's still funny that, you know, they'll drop these tiny little hints. I mean, they got to keep everybody hungry. I understand that. It's just very funny. This was one of the articles we looked at was from the Daily Beast, and they actually hosted a panel or a dinner and a discussion at South by Southwest in Austin. And, you know, it talked a lot about the companion series, and so that's where we got some of this new information. You know, it's interesting. They did release that there was going to be about 6 seconds of reference to the original Walking Dead. This is what I'm talking about. It's like 6 seconds, you know, and they sort of drop these little details and get all of the Walking Dead fans all frothy at the mouth. So
what does that even mean? 6 seconds of referring to the original series.
I don't know what that even means. So
it must, you know, I have no idea. Unless it is about the criminals that Rick gets in the shootout with that lands him in hospital. That's the only thing I can think of that could tie the timelines together in a way.
Yeah, I don't know. But in any case, it's still more news. The 2-season news is very big news. So I hope it continues to sort of roll out the joy and looking forward to this. So I'm very excited to see it.
And absolutely. Yeah. And then the Kim Dickens interview. Mm-hmm. That's pretty interesting, especially given the context of the Cliff Curtis one that we talked about last week when we were like, or a couple, I forget when we talked about that, where he admitted to not having ever seen the show or read the books. And this article also says, you know, Kim Dickens also has not seen the show or read the books. But here they spin it as
a positive.
Like it was by design. Mm-hmm. In fact, because they want her to come into the role not knowing anything about what the apocalypse world of Robert Kirkman's imagination will be. And I guess, if she's a good actor, then I feel like that shouldn't be that difficult for her to pull off. But,
and then there was a little tongue-in-cheek mention about, how the zombies would be different on the spin-off. And it's a bit
like that.
I think it was a bit tongue-in-cheek, although I think it's sort of obvious, but they were talking about the Hollywood implants and on the West Coast, how there's a lot more plastic surgery and such, so they'll probably play up on that a little bit, but yeah, I just hate the term sexy zombies generally, so.
Never ends well.
Nope. Although that'll play a little bit into what we discussed today, indeed, so. And then lastly, there was this bizarro little article that was on, like, Huffington Post, and it was this doctor who's like a general practitioner, I don't even know what, and it was asking what drugs you should stock up on in a zombie apocalypse. And so the guy, the doctor who weighed in on this is named Samsa Kalanen, and he's a bit of a zombie fan and enthusiast and wanted to chime in. And some of his suggestions are really interesting. But I kind of question how I think some of these would be less helpful than others because I think other people would try to take them from you.
Yeah, obviously.
So, the usual suspects, some, to rehydrate sort of the electrolyte powders and stuff like that. Just sort of moxifloxacin, which is just an antibacterial broad spectrum type of thing, which is like an antibiotic, but it's like kind of takes the main culprits, including staph and all sorts of stuff, so that you wouldn't have to worry too much, hopefully, about infection. But the one on the list that I was sort of raising an eyebrow at was oxycodone. And he does have a sound reasoning for this, is that there's going to be a lot of pain. It's effective. You can carry it because you can administer it orally, and it has a really long-lasting effect. However, this is also the drug that is the culprit for a lot of, the addiction and pharmacies getting knocked off and kind of crazy stuff. So I don't know that this is going to improve your situation during a zombie apocalypse, because I think people are going to try to get this from you, and I think if you take it, you're going to somewhat be ineffectual against the infected, don't you?
Well, you're either rendered ineffectual by being unable to manage pain, or you're I feel like if you're in enough pain that you need to take a painkiller like oxycodone, then you're probably already not in a good place. So this is more just so that you can get through a night without screaming and drawing zombies to you, I would assume.
I guess so. And then, there's a few others in here. It is an interesting list. And then one of the things he didn't throw in there were things like asthma inhaler. See, I'd be a dead duck in a zombie apocalypse. Adrenaline and all that stuff, because he's like, you probably can't provide sustained care, so all this stuff you got to forget about. All you diabetics out there, you're dead meat because you need your insulin all the time, and you're not going to be able to get that. So just it was an interesting little article, which is why I threw it on there. So
yeah, it's pretty good. Have you ever seen a film? It's on or was on Netflix called Goodbye World. It stars Adrian Grenier and a few other people.
I haven't.
It's not zombie related, but it is about societal breakdown. And not to give you any more of the plot than this, the key dramatic tension in the film comes from some people know one guy has medicine, other people know he has medicine, and they want it, and he doesn't want to give it up. And so it's definitely, as you said, while it would be amazing to have access to these things, it is also going to be a key source of tension between people when there aren't supplies.
Right, because then these things become the commodities that people are looking for. So.
Yep.
So anyway, but I just thought it was a fun little thing to throw in there. Anything else to say?
No, I think that that's about it. Should we move on to iZombie?
I think we should.
iZombie the book.
Yeah, so as we were reading this, so originally I read the first couple of issues of this, and I totally forgot that I had done this. And I read this. The 2 issues I read were in paper format, I think. Somebody gave them to me because clearly my interests are what they are. And then, I am a comic book fan and a graphic novel fan, but in my adult years, it's a tough thing to keep up with storylines and things like that. So I tend to read them sort of in bunches, binge read, if you will. So when they come out, and you can now read them in a bunch of formats, and most graphic novels, especially if they're by, sort of the well-known companies like Image and Dark Horse and DC and Marvel and all that, they all come out online now through various apps. So probably the last few I've been reading online, and that includes actually a lot of the Walking Dead issues. Is that how you read this too, Stuart?
Yes, I did. Yes.
And, the thing about it is that it is a very different experience reading it online than reading it as just a regular book. And part of that is because of the format of graphic novels, because you are reading them panel by panel, but just visually how you take in information, you're getting a different sense of the story because of how it's all laid out. I think reading it online, you miss some of that bigger picture. And so I did and have found that to be somewhat difficult to adjust to.
Yeah, it's tough. And some apps that you read on will take you panel by panel. Mm-hmm. But even then, there's these weird resolution and formatting decisions that get made that obviously are not designed for the way we're ingesting it.
Right. I do think that some companies have reacted to this, but it depends on when the graphic novel came out, and some are better read in this format than others. But this particular one, I definitely noticed a huge difference in the quality between different panels. And it's still, it was still fine to read it that way, and the easiest way for me to do that from a time perspective, because that's the other thing. There's a huge comic book store in New York called Midtown Comics, which I love to go to, but to take the time to be able to go there, and it's usually a total madhouse, amazing, fun, awesome madhouse, but it is a total madhouse to try to go and, pick up what you need. You need to basically dedicate a lot of time. Well, maybe I just need to dedicate a lot of time to go in there and spend time and browse around, because you're going to pick up all the stuff that you want. So basically, to save myself that and the temptation on my wallet, I try to do things a little bit more online than I used to. But it's still, there is something definitely lacking. But the other thing is that I certainly have become, and it's been watching television shows as well, and the fact that a lot of TV shows, especially if they're made for things like Netflix or Amazon, you have the ability to watch everything at once or watch it in chunks. You get to progress the story a lot more quickly. It used to be you'd have to wait. And there was something awesome about that, sort of the delayed gratification of waiting for a story to come out and seeing how it unfolded. And now I just want to read it all at once. I have a very hard time waiting for that story. So in this case, I read the first couple of issues, because this came out in 2010, I think, or 2011. And I just didn't, 2010. And so, I just had a really hard time waiting for the stories to come out, so I just put it aside. It wasn't that I didn't like it. I think the artwork's actually very good. I think some of it's fun. It's very pithy. Some of the storylines are interesting, but I just sort of lost track of it. So, yeah. But how, did you enjoy it? I guess initially is what I want to know.
Yeah, I guess, yeah. I have gotten back into reading graphic novels, comics since the tablet, the arrival of the iPad and things like that. And so it wasn't that. So this is now how I'm used to consuming this kind of media, for better or worse. And this one was really good, and I like the fact that it feels so contemporary. The fact that even though the first 10 pages actually were confusing to me because it's kind of a cold open, you get introduced to the characters without any backstory. I kind of thought it was out of order, but I like the fact that it feels contemporary, and the stories are, because there's multiple different stories in Volume 1, right? Mm-hmm. they're they're good. They're good stories, and they're original. So I enjoyed it.
They are. I mean, I think that technique is it's the idea that they're going to give you little sort of peeks at the characters and their backstories, and eventually they fill it in, and there's these mysteries and things like that, and it's supposed to pique your interest. I do think that the way that they unwrap this package, so to speak, is not as it's definitely not linear as you just mentioned, but I don't think that they do this as successfully as other storylines have done. Although I think as you progress into I actually, this is showing my issue with the whole delayed gratification thing. I read the rest of the series, or I'm almost finished with the rest of the series, and it's good. And there's pieces of it I don't like. I think there's always a little bit of that, especially if it's a longer storyline. But what's interesting is that they decided to end this at issue 28, which is pretty unusual. For, these days, you kind of see stories going on forever and ever and ever. Watchmen is an example of one that did not do this. Sandman, although Sandman's now coming back. Generally, the series just tend to run. So my guess is that it probably wasn't as well received as other books. Plus, this was through Vertigo. And maybe it just it didn't make as big of a hit as they were hoping to, and so they stopped it there. But as we've seen, CW is picking this up, so I think that I definitely see a lot of that potential there, and I felt that as I was reading this first volume especially. Like, there's a lot of potential for storylines there, and I can see why they were like, okay, we could definitely take this and transform this into something that people would want to watch.
It definitely has a feeling of kind of like Being Human. You ever seen that show?
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. And I don't know, we've talked a little bit about the CW series and what some people were saying about it in terms of some of the changes that they made. And I also, in reading this first volume, I felt a little bit, the Cemetery Man piece that they,
yes,
I felt. Too. I felt like they were definitely referencing some of that. So there's a little tip of the hat there. I liked, there was definitely a little bit of Being Human, because there's a ghost.
Yeah, you've got the trio of like roommates or best friends who are all somehow otherworldly.
Right,
yeah.
And you also have you throw in some vampires there later on. So there's also a little bit Buffy going on. There's monster hunters. It's hard to tell who's on the good side, who's on the bad side. So I liked it. I really enjoyed it, obviously, or I wouldn't be reading through the rest of the series. But it actually made me a lot more excited to see what the CW actually is going to do with this, and specifically what Rob Thomas is going to do with this. And
right.
I've seen a couple of interviews with him, and he's so excited about it. And one thing that does concern me a little bit is that it feels a little Veronica Mars and maybe a little bit Buffy, but perhaps that's what the CW wants, is something slightly lighter. And so I am disappointed in that they're making the main character Gwen, and they're making her a coroner instead of the gravedigger.
Yeah, that's like the biggest difference, right? I mean, up front that I'm aware of, and probably will be others. But so what do you think of that choice? She's a gravedigger in the comic book, and she seems like very of modest, status in society. But as a coroner or a mortician or whatever she is, she's actually, I think she works for the police, right?
Right. So I think that part of what they're trying to do with the show is make her into some sort of a, that rogue woman who's solving mysteries or whatever. And
that's kind of what she's kind of forced to do that as the gravedigger too, though, right?
She is. Maybe it's because people aren't as familiar with gravediggers. Maybe it's so that she doesn't look as disgusting all digging graves or something. I actually would have I wish they hadn't changed that piece of this. It just feels a little, I don't know. I think that that's kind of a cool part of this whole story, and part of what I liked is that there's all these sorts of weird scenes with her and the other gravediggers just hanging out. And
I wonder where the creator came up with the idea that there were going to be 5 people in their 20s hanging out digging graves in the local cemetery in Eugene, Oregon. I mean, is that like a thing?
I don't know, but
I thought gravediggers were always like older dudes, just kind of, this is one guy, and he's the guy who does the digging of the graves, and he probably does it with a backhoe instead of a like
by
a bunch
hand,
of shovels.
like these people are doing. And
Yeah.
well, I thought of that too, but we have had a downturn in the economy. Maybe there's more openings for gravediggers these days than we thought, and perhaps if you're a loner, you want flexible hours, this is what you do.
Could be.
But so I thought that this was sort of a quirky little piece for them to throw into it. The other thing is that being a gravedigger, you're not really you're kind of an outsider generally. You're not in the normal world, which is putting her into, you could argue, I suppose, that a coroner / mortician is not exactly in the normal world, but they're still interacting with people in a different way than you would be if you were a gravedigger. If you're a gravedigger, you're kind of, you're there at people's unhappiest moments. You're lurking around graveyards. You're not, people aren't viewing you in a professional capacity necessarily.
And that's definitely played. That's a topic of this first volume, is when
Right.
she goes up to the mother and child, basically grieving at the graveside, a grave that she dug, and they reference that. They're like, "Why don't you go bury somebody else's loved ones?"
Right.
That's, I mean, it's a little bit weird, and I guess you can still have that interaction as a coroner to be like, yes, please identify the body of your loved one, and then she can still kind of have those moments of interaction with the living.
Yeah.
But there shouldn't be so much of the weird I hate you for burying my husband sort of reactions.
Right, and then there's also the other piece of it, but I think some of the other the character of Gwen in this graphic novel is disgusted by what she has to do. She really does not want to eat brains. They taste disgusting. She kind of has to do this. It's a survival skill for her because she is undead, so she has to eat brains in order to keep her own memories, or at least to stay sentient. And she does take on the memories of the people that she's consuming. And there's been all this tongue-in-cheek stuff with the trailers of the show anyway, where it shows brains, like, and her eating brains with chopsticks and other things sort of thrown in there, which is
Ice cream cones, yeah.
Ice cream cone brain type things, and which I think the gravedigger aspect, because she's basically diving into these graves she's been digging up, and she has to go in and violate the resting place, and she's totally disgusted by what she has to do. I think you can be equally disgusted if somebody's doing that in the morgue, but it's not quite the same as if people, just sort of like diving in, coffin diving,
Yeah,
So
that's a good point. And they do make a big deal of how disgusting she finds. She doesn't enjoy eating brains, so.
No. And she even wants to do this away from anybody she knows, like her friends, her ghost friend Ellie, and things like that.
Well, she hasn't even told Spot about it, right?
No.
Oh, shit. What was I going to say? I don't know anymore. Oh, wait, no. The mythology, her reasoning for eating brains. It's almost like later on in the volume, we get a lesson in the canon, if you will. Why would we have all this, the whole undersoul, oversoul thing, which I honestly thought was really interesting and a cool way to kind of set all this up. But she's oblivious to all of this, and she's just been eating the brains, as you said, to try and maintain sentience. But as it turns out, she actually doesn't really remember elements of her life anymore. She doesn't remember her own brother. Is that who that blonde guy is?
Yes, that's who he is. And there's also, I don't know if you caught it, but there's some other guy kind of running around that she used to be friends with, which I think you learn about later. But it's so different things are revealed later on, so I encourage you to read the rest of them. Mm-hmm. And that clear up a couple of these details. But no, she is definitely, her method with eating the brains is, she's doing it, you have to wonder how she discovered that she had to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
And and then the other thing that they do, I liked them laying out the whole the canon for this as well, the rules, so to speak. I thought that it was a cool way of thinking about it, and they don't just describe her situation, but they describe the situation of her friend Ellie, her were-terrier friend Spot, her situation, but also the situation of the brain-eating zombies that have no sentience.
Mm-hmm. And as well as poltergeists and vampires. Everybody has kind of like an explanation for why they're doing what they do.
And it's kind of a nice little... Like, you don't often get that kind of detail in something so quickly, which I did appreciate, given how a little bit loop-de-loo some of the narrative was in the beginning. So I did enjoy this a lot, and I liked what they were doing with the different characters. So I am excited to see the show now, more so, but I am a little bit worried that they're going to go even more, because this is definitely a little bit bubblegum junk food graphic novel, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. You know, this is no Walking Dead comic, if you want to think about it that way. But It is a fun read. They do have some fun ideas and storylines, and I do like some of the interactions. And there is a nice little twisted sense of humor about the whole thing, which I enjoyed.
Yeah, it definitely feels. Honestly, it feels like CW material.
It does.
So I think it'll probably be a decent fit for what I would consider their audience.
No, absolutely. And you know, what did you think of the artwork?
Yeah, it's it has a bit of a Liechtenstein kind of feel to it with the background, which is cool. And
I actually think that's why some of it doesn't translate quite as well into reading it on a tablet or on your computer, as opposed to reading it as like a book in real life. So, but I liked the art a lot with this, and I thought they have some really cool scenes, and the setup for some of the scenes. I think that there's like some of these little transitions where she's having a strong emotion, and they'll show her very zombified, which I kind of like. It's a fun little book, so I do recommend it. If people have an interest in this, then you should definitely check it out.
Yeah. Are we done?
No, that's just good.
Yeah, but I would agree that between the art and the story and all the background and the world that they're building, including the Foster Corporation or whatever they're called, it's very cool. Even though some of it's like kind of I guess parts of it are predictable. The fact that Horatio is gonna, and what's her name, Gwen, are gonna like get together and then have a terribly awkward relationship because he's a monster
killer.
She's a monster, yeah.
Well, isn't that that's a little bit Buffy Angel, no? Or Buffy Spike?
Not that familiar with. I guess that's right. She is Buffy the Vampire Hunter?
Slayer.
And he is a vampire. Correct. Yes. So maybe it's a little on the nose there. In fact,
I will also, the casting for this, after rereading this little volume, I think that it's Rose. I keep calling her Rose McIver. It might be McIver, but I like calling her MacGyver because it reminds me of MacGyver. Anyway, I think their casting of her as the main character, which they changed her name as well in the series. I think they're calling her Olivia or something like that. I think she spot on looks a lot like this, which is a little bit difficult to do. They did get rid of a lot of the other characters, though, so that makes me wonder what they're going to do with this.
So that's an interesting point. Let's look quickly at the IMDb and see what the character list looks like and compare it with the book.
I mean, it looks like a lot of the characters are going to be present in the... they're in the mortuary or something like that. So my guess is that they're probably going to unveil some of these things, but they haven't really said it as much outright.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll have to wait and see. But I'm not really seeing that they're really taking a ton from the book, other than the sort of general idea.
They've changed all the names.
Mm-hmm. So even if you wanted to know, it doesn't really.
Yeah. Because. Like her immediate co-stars are named Clive Babineau and then Dr. Ravi Chakrabarti. Mm-hmm. So maybe one of those guys is a ghost and the other one's a were-terrier, but maybe not. or maybe
Right.
Molly. Ava Moore, it might be the ghost. Who knows?
Who knows? But
Curious. There's no Horatio.
there's no, not yet. Who knows how it's gonna play out. It's interesting though because this is also going to be on. I don't know if this is going to be how it is forever, but it is premiering Tuesday night, which is the 17th, and that's the same night as The Flash. So I'm wondering if they're going to try to have a little bit of bounce in ratings and hope to pull in the same audience, which I think they may be successful at.
Hmm. Do you have any idea where the TV show is set?
I think it's still set in Oregon.
There was one character on the cast list that said Vancouver Police.
Well, maybe. And actually, if that is the case, that would make sense because they probably...
It's not much of a difference, really, between Eugene, Oregon, and Vancouver. I mean, some people would probably get mad at me for saying that, but similar temperate zone, right?
Well, the weird thing is that they do make such a huge deal out of it being in Oregon that is an interesting switch. But I'm wondering if the reason that they're doing that is because Grimm is set in Portland, Oregon, and maybe they don't want to have too much comparison between those shows.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Grimm is like all Oregon all the time, so I can't. My guess is that that's part of why they're doing it this way.
There's nothing actually in here that specifically says it's not going to be in Eugene, but that was one character on the cast list.
Well, I guess
maybe they take a road trip to Vancouver. It could be just as simple as that.
No, it makes sense and also it's a lot cheaper for them to film in Canada than it would be here anyway. So maybe it's just easier for them to just place it all in Vancouver and leave it at that. But we shall see.
Do you have any thoughts about the sorority vampire situation?
That's a really interesting idea for a storyline. It is a little strange. So basically there's this group within this storyline. There is a group of vampires that were turned by their sorority sister, and they didn't even really like her that much. They thought she was kind of annoying, and she turned all of them. So as a good group of organized sorority sisters does, they basically have figured out a way to get their prey to come to them. So they've set up a paintball course and business, and they lure different groups to come out, and they can drink to their heart's content, and nobody will ever notice. So the idea is that they won't actually, kill the people that they're drinking from. Just little sips, right?
Right, yeah.
But one of them just keeps going rogue and is sort of leaving dried out carcasses all over town. So they have to have a team meeting and talk to her and tell her to like rein it in. So, I mean, the whole idea is that they don't want to be too conspicuous about the fact that they're in town, and they don't want to draw attention to themselves, and she's putting them all in jeopardy.
And she's what draws the Foster Corporation to the town, you would assume.
Yep, because all these bodies keep showing up.
Yeah.
So it's a problem. It's a problem when people don't agree.
So either way, I thought that was kind of cool. Just like an all ladies vampire club.
I like that too. I thought that was nice. And they're pretty, they're pretty badass. So, they've got organization, imagination, infighting,
entrepreneurial spirit.
Yep. I also really liked the character of Spot. I thought that was a pretty funny thing.
Well, do you like it because they take something scary like a werewolf and make it kind of sappy like a terrier?
A little bit, and this poor guy is kind of like, he's hanging out, he's, it's not even like he can be a cool monster, he's like a were-terrier. And he's also super nerdy and into comic books, so maybe that's why I have a soft spot for him. But, he's just forced to deal with this horrible situation where he has to lock himself up until his terrierness passes every month. So that's kind of nice. That's a little bit of the tongue-in-cheek stuff too, though.
It's like when he does turn, he cancels plans with his coworkers and then just goes home and plays video games. Like, right. That's his plan. That's his plan for being a were-terrier.
Yeah, he plays video games and has like pizza delivered and stuff like that, and just locks himself up. So, kind of similar to what most people would do in that situation, I suppose. They just binge watch or play Xbox or something. So.
Yeah, so I guess we just keep describing little elements of these stories that we appeal to us, and I hope that the show can capture some of this kind of, I don't know, innocuous humor, but dealing with kind of what are supposed to be scary topics. I don't want them to like sap all the terror out of the undead, but it is at the same time, as we discussed on a previous podcast, it would be nice to have a kind of a lighthearted show.
Right. And I mean, that's when Rob Thomas was talking about this, the only thing that I admit just rankled me, and I think we touched on this in a previous episode, is that he said, and speaking of hot zombies or sexy zombies, he was saying it's more warm bodies than Walking Dead. And I was like, no, you didn't just say that. And I do think that his writing and his ability to run a show and walk that line. I mean, Veronica Mars, I know you're not a fan, but Veronica Mars definitely skirted that line between being lighthearted and also super dark. I mean, it covered a lot of very, very heavy issues, but it also brought you back a lot of the time because there was just these fun, lighthearted scenes, and there was relationships between characters that you could really, it balanced out the darkness, so to speak. So yeah. I think he has the skill set to do it. Whether it's done well is the question I have. I also, it's interesting. It feels very, I hate to say it and sort of sum up this way before even seeing it, but it feels very Veronica Mars with monsters, which is basically Buffy. So, so I will reserve my judgment until we actually see this, but there's a lot of interesting stuff in here, but it does make me curious about why they dropped so much of what appears to me to be the basis for this graphic novel and the storyline. We'll
have to see how they maybe they're reintroducing it similarly but different. I don't know, but maybe. Yeah, I do agree that the balance of light and dark is very important. Even with the first murder case she solves, in the first volume,
it's pretty dark.
It's dark, and it's got some unexpected elements, mm-hmm. some original storytelling where the supposed victim is actually, it's maybe a little bit Law and Order, where it's like the first guy you pin the crime on. Well, actually, he did do it, and he is a murderer. But
there's a little bit, there's a little bit the procedural drama aspect of this definitely appears to be there a bit. They can probably play that up. Yeah. So yeah, I think that there's a lot that they could do with this, and I do think that it has the makings of a great show. We'll just have to wait and see, I suppose. And now we don't have that much longer to wait, which is nice.
Yeah, and so I guess, is that what we're going to talk about the next time we get together to podcast?
I think we should.
Okay, because it's by the time this is published, the show will probably already have aired this episode, and then but our next episode will definitely be talking about the pilot and our reactions.
Yeah, and I look forward to chatting with you about that, and I'm really hoping it's good. As you said, no, I really do. I would love there to be a fun, more lighthearted show about undead things on TV, but maybe that's just me.
Well, we'll see. In the meantime, if anybody wants to chime in and tell us their thoughts on this graphic novel becoming a show, or just the graphic novel itself, you know how to get to us. Or if you don't, you can email us at reanimatedpodcast@gmail.com, or tweet at us at reanimatedpcast, or just leave us a message on the show notes at reanimatedpodcast.com.
Excellent. So until next time, I guess watch iZombie.
Yeah, and then we'll talk about it then.
Excellent. Bye.
Laters.